To eat is the privilege of the living. Those are the words that close the first episode of Studio Trigger's Delicious in Dungeon, an anime that's about a cute group of ragtag adventurers cooking some unusual meals while they heroically aim to save their beloved Fallon. My name is Juno, your local Mothman. Subscribe, relax, and welcome to this deep dive into the bowels of Ryokokui's masterpiece, Delicious in Dungeon. In this video, we'll embark on a journey to unravel the deeper themes of this seemingly sweet show, and I promise you, some of these insights will have you questioning your own view on life. And if you haven't watched the anime or read the manga, I sincerely recommend you add this video to your watch later list and then go and get through Dungeon Meshi. No amount of my yapping can substitute the experience of Ryokokui lovingly slapping you in the face with existential dread. But if you're based and have watched the show and I asked you, what is Dungeon Meshi about? What would you answer? Cooking? Autism? Monsters? Star-crossed lesbian lovers? Izutsumi? While all of those answers are correct, there is no right or wrong way to interpret the text. There is one theme that creates a pattern in this series. One thing at the center of every episode: food. So let's enter the dungeon together and take a look at dungeon food. I lied. Even if at first it seems like it, the main focus of the series isn't food. And if you read the title, I bet you've called my bluff immediately. Yes, this video is about the main theme of Dungeon Meshi: desire. And what a better entry to the theme of desire than hunger. What does it mean to hunger? When Senshi enters the dungeon for the first time, he doesn't know the answer to that question yet. He is a very young dwarf, not having even reached the age of maturity yet, when his party makes an extraordinary discovery: a golden castle glimmering brilliantly in the dark. Hesitantly, Senshi follows his party into the depths of the dungeon, unsure if his companions are still themselves as their eyes reflect the shine of the gold, almost as if in a trance. And then, the nightmare begins. Whatever had lured them into the darkness was ready to hunt. One by one, his party was picked off like prey in a cruel game of cat and mouse. The days turn into weeks, and weeks turn into months, and the food runs out. Not once was Senshi able to see whatever was attacking them and ripping away member after member until it's just 3 of them left. They eat their horse, and when even that meat runs out, they can do nothing as starvation gets the better of them. And yet, through it all, Gillen, the party leader and Senshi's mentor, puts Senshi first. He gives him the best parts of the meat and always offers words of comfort. He fights for Senshi against Bergen, who is ready to leave the good-for-nothing kid behind. After all,
and what good are we if we can't even nurture the next generation of dwarves?
The fighting gets so intense that Gillen takes Briggan outside to solve it, and then...
What happened out there? Where's Briggan?
Thanks to this final meal he eats with Gillen, before his friend leaves their hiding spot to never return, Senshi finally has the determination to organize the maps he's been creating and leave the dungeon. However, when he makes it to the surface, he doesn't last there long. One question keeps him up at night: whose meat did he truly eat? Whoever lured me into watching this show through cute farsal fanart, I curse you and I bless you for letting me experience the absolute heartbreak of this episode. Ryokokui truly cooked with Senshi, and did so in such a sneaky way. Because here's the thing, Senshi is portrayed to us throughout most of the season as an eccentric, monster cuisine enthusiast that is very much stuck in his ways. He doesn't like magic, he isn't all that thrilled about the number of adventurers entering the dungeon, he doesn't know what half-foods are, he doesn't understand Marcel's reservation against eating monsters. And then when the Tauden party encounters the hippogriff, and suddenly there's a gut-punching reveal that Senshi is a character defined by two things: hunger and trauma. Then what does it mean to hunger? Now Senshi knows that to hunger means to sacrifice, both in a metaphorical way but also in a guttural physical way. When Senshi, despite Marcel's and Laios' protest, tries to ride the Kelpie across the water, it seems as if he's just too naive to understand the danger he's putting himself into. And then you realize that he named the Kelpie Anne, just like the horse the minor party sacrificed. Senshi sacrificed a life on the surface in order to find answers to his questions, but the sacrifice that left the deepest scar on Senshi's psyche is Gillen's sacrifice. Senshi, his party leader, was like an older brother to him, sacrificing himself and his authority with the remaining party members to keep him fed. That is deeply ingrained in his mind. That's why revisiting scenes where Senshi focuses on cooking and finding food instead of what the party is doing is kinda heartbreaking. His paternal care over Chochuk is a running gag, but Senshi shows quiet disapproval of Laios as a leader because he views Chochuk as a child that's being put in danger. Eat or be eaten. That's the world Senshi lives in. To gain something, you need to sacrifice something first. To hunger means to suffer. But you know what? I disagree. I'm not interested in falling into the trap of the dungeon and agreeing with Senshi's traumatized brain. Looking at hunger as a price of living is not accurate in my opinion. Hunger, desire, isn't a punishment. It's the fuel to life. It honestly makes me really emotional to think of how Senshi continues to overcome his trauma. He is still trapped in his past and cannot leave the dungeon. He still mourns his friends, and yet Senshi makes the best out of it. He cares for the dungeon. He formed a respectable bond with the orcs. He learned to cook, which in my opinion is a very direct way for him to overcome his trauma. And the moment he found the Tauden party and noticed Laios' interest in monster food, he immediately sprung into action. Because I believe he was lonely. He longed for connection. You can see that the closer the party gets to finding Fallon in the first half of the show, the more distant Senshi becomes. And I believe that Senshi only truly realized it after eating the hippogriff soup. After clearing his mind of the guilt, he realized that what he truly was hungry for, what he lacked throughout the years, and why he stuck with the Tauden party through thick and thin was because he needed other people. He needed a family. And sometimes the family is two middle-aged dudes, 3 awkward 20-somethings, and a teenager. And I think that's beautiful. It's so cool that in Dungeon Meshi, no matter what, you can sit down together and enjoy a meal. After all, everyone needs to eat. And so every time characters sit down to eat, it's a bonding moment, uninterrupted by differing opinions or goals. Okay, that's not true. Let's rewind a bit. What does it mean to hunger? Shura knew the answer to the question from the moment he entered the dungeon. To hunger means to care. To give up on yourself for the sake of others is a noble act. Is there a more pure show of affection than putting aside your own needs for the one you love? God, I cannot imagine how infuriating it must have been for Mr. I only ever had 2 selfish requests in my life, Toshiro Nakamoto, to see the Tauden party well fed and rested, parading around the dungeon after failing to save Fallon. I mean, I actually can imagine seeing that this was his expression, but what happens later is much more important. Once Shuro throws hands for the very first time in his life and finally eats a decent meal, he rids himself of this pent-up anger and realizes 2 things. One, that sacrificing himself for Fallon would not help, because does Shuro's hunger help Fallon? Is there any honor to be found in uniting yourself with the dead by giving up on what makes you human? And 2, it wouldn't result in her giving him the affection he desires. Okay, hear me out. Contrary to popular belief in the fandom, I believe that Shuro understands and respects Fallon, even if his approach is a bit clumsy. He is deeply enamored with this gentle woman, seeing her as a kindred spirit due to his own shyness and timidity, compared to the woman he's surrounded with, Pushimizuru and a squad of subordinate ninjas. Fallon might be the first woman that showed him some understanding and gentleness. This situation is straight out of a historical romance novel. Of course he'd act accordingly, especially since he and his culture romanticize the struggle. Shuro needs to be a selfless, brave knight, sacrificing his own well-being to heroically and selflessly save the one he loves. And then there's Laios. Laios is a selfish prick that only cares about eating monsters. That kind of view on Laios seems to be shared by many people that meet him, but it doesn't sit quite well with Kabru. Yet at the same time, he doesn't have any other clue as to why Laios behaves the way he does. The man is an enigma. On one side, despite being ill-prepared, he was ready to make his way back into the dungeon to save his beloved sister. On the other side, he seems much more interested in eating the creatures he meets on his way. He seems to be completely oblivious, maybe ignorant to the feelings of the people around him. Who is Laios Tauden? What brought him to this dungeon? Is he a psychopath, drawing enjoyment from tormenting his party members with monster cuisine? Or is he completely crazy to the point where he might love the monsters? That cannot be. Kabru knows monsters better than most people. He remembers their disgusting bodies ripping through the earth of Utaya and killing everything in their wake. What would happen if such a selfish, obsessed man took the throne of the Golden Country? Kabru simply cannot allow that to happen. He cannot let Laios' selfish desire put others in danger. He needs to take the matters into his own hands. Kabru is ready to sacrifice anything and everything to ensure the safety of the island. Everybody that knows Kabru knows that he would be a good ruler. He's generous and a good leader. He would protect the island from the meddling elves and keep the dungeon safe. Because he's completely selfless. He's not like Laios, focused only on his own desire, ready to do anything to achieve it. Ready to put others in harm's way to do what he thinks is right. Yin-yang is the symbol from Chinese philosophy that represents absolute equality. An idea that opposites complement each other and that in order for something to exist, it needs both sides. That even in darkness, there is light. I chose this theme for this chapter because I believe it is a perfect analogy for our topics, Kabru and Laios. Selflessness and selfishness. Both Kabru and Laios, in their desire, are just as selfless as they are selfish. but their actions get interpreted in a completely different way. Cabru sees Laios as a selfish and dangerous person. The reason for that is both that he misunderstands Laios and because he can't get a grasp on Laios' motives. And also, Laios, by accident, perfectly sets himself up to be a villain. I mean, come on, he's supposed to be on this noble mission to save his little sister, and yet the one thing that he cares the most about is monster cuisine. He seems brash and uninterested in people, and because of that, he comes off as careless and unpredictable. Obviously, we as the audience know that Laios does care and isn't completely crazy, and that Laios simply doesn't get people. He isn't aware of the etiquette surrounding self-expression. He openly talks about the things he likes and wants, and as a result, he is perceived as a weirdo that, above all else, cares about monsters. But we know Laios does care about his sister. Through this first season, we get to see quite a lot of Laios' internal monologue about Fallon, how he misses her, how he wishes he didn't leave the village when he did, how he would have sacrificed himself in place of Fallon. He worries about her and misses her dearly, but the way he expresses it to the people around him makes it difficult for them to realize that. I think that since Laios doesn't understand social cues, he doesn't realize that he's expected to be solely focused on saving Fallon. To him, these things can coexist. His love for monsters and excitement over them doesn't override his worry and love for Fallon. This kind of misunderstanding is common for neurodivergent people, speaking as one of said neurodivergent people, because in many cultures it's outright impolite to speak of one's wants and sometimes even needs. In reality, Laios is just Laios. He's just as selfish as he is selfless in the things he wants. Laios cares about many things. Some are just a bit more monstrous than the others. Now Cabru, on the other hand, presents himself in a very different manner. He is purposeful and manipulative, and that makes him such a compelling and intriguing character. Cabru's motivations are complicated. He truly does have pure intentions. He simply doesn't want another tragedy to happen. But the way he goes about it is selfish, because he doesn't take into account that manipulating and killing people just might happen to be immoral. Not only that, what I find to be really interesting is that Cabru deliberately positions himself as a selfless hero that is there to save everybody. He has this feeling of self-importance. He always puts himself in this position of control and authority. Even though he's just another adventurer, he gives himself the right to wipe out an entire party of muggers, appointing himself the judge, jury, and executioner of the dungeon. Treating other people like a puzzle to solve is fine as long as it gets him closer to his goals. Editing Juno here, I think it's important to remember, I don't think I mentioned it here, but Cabru is treating people like puzzles mainly due to his trauma and his own neurodivergency, not because he's some evil mastermind. Cabru bases his entire identity around being selfless, and to a degree, he is. Cabru is just Cabru, just as selfless as he is selfish. And that's why Laios and Cabru complement each other so very well. Both their selfishness and their selflessness comes from the way they perceive the world around them. To Laios, people are confusing and hypocritical, unstable in their nature, unlike the monsters he loves so much that simply do the things they do to survive. To Cabru, social interactions are a playing field, even though he loves people and humanity, and would do anything to protect them from monsters, which he hates so much. Laios doesn't understand people, and Cabru doesn't understand monsters. What they both understand is fear. Out of fear, a desire is born. and the desire plays you like a doll, making you do things you normally wouldn't, and it makes you run, run, run. How far would you go to protect yourself from what you fear the most? Marcel knows the answer to that question long before she enters the dungeon. She's been running for a very long time after all. So when she stands in front of the corpse of the red dragon, she already knows that she is ready to do whatever she has to in order to save Fallon. What is love if not digging through viscera, carving your way through bones and flesh to find the one you've lost? What is devotion if not doing the forbidden and unspeakable to bring back who you love? Marcel understands the consequences of her actions. She knows what she's sacrificing by bringing Fallon back, even if she's quite certain she can get away with it. And she's ready to sacrifice whatever it takes to save and protect the people she loves. Why? Because she's terrified. I cannot fully analyze Marcel's journey without spoiling the manga, so I won't talk about it no matter how much I want to. Let me know in the comments if you would like me to return on this channel to Marcel once the season with her arc comes out, because I would love to do that. But right now, let's focus on this moment, the night after Fallon's resurrection, when I think we can see Marcel exposing some of her worst qualities.
Oh, don't be so ridiculous! I don't care if you've grown, you're still a runt in my eyes.
Desire, fear, and control. I believe those three things are intrinsically connected, creating an Ouroboros of sorts. And Marcel is a character that showcases that connection the most, maybe aside from Thistle. Marcel's fear of death turns into a desire to protect others from that fate, and that desire manifests by her constantly taking control away from the people she's trying to protect. She treats her party members with shorter lifespans like kids. She tries to decide for them, she scolds them, she always thinks she knows better than them, and she does all of that because it creates distance. Because if she actually acknowledges others' agency, she'll have to acknowledge that even though they may be younger than her in years, they are aging at a very fast rate. Chotak is already middle-aged at 29. With his race's lifespan of 50, he will probably be gone within the next 2 decades, which is nothing to Marcel. And how difficult must it be to accept that the child you once met is now a woman, one that has her own agency, and that can and is able to talk and think for herself? By denying Fallon that agency, Marcel protects herself from the painful realization that her time with Fallon is very limited. Even when Marcel was looking at Fallon's body, the very much adult body she piece by piece put together, she still cannot see her as an equal. Even though Marcel is ready to do very difficult things to save her, she isn't ready to accept the passage of time. She isn't ready to treat her friend like an adult and not a curious kid. Marcel's desire to protect people she loves from what she fears the most causes her to do horrible things. So if desire is something that can be twisted to hurt others, then what is the answer? To get rid of desire altogether? This video is sponsored by my lovely patrons, and that if you would like to see exclusive videos, weekly behind the scenes updates, as well as a bunch of art, you can join my Patreon for $1.50, and I will be eternally indebted to you. This entire part of the video will be about 2 of my favorite characters, Mithrin and Thistle. And it will contain spoilers for the entire manga, so if you don't want to be spoiled, please skip to the next chapter. Okay, now that the anime exclusive fans are gone, holy sh**, guys, Do you know how difficult it is to make a video about desire in Dungeon Meshi without spoiling the manga? Because now I do. And the funniest thing is that I started writing this essay before I read the manga. So initially, I didn't know that I hit bullseye with my analysis of the anime. And then later, it was too late to turn back. So anyway, Mithrin is my most beloved character in the entire series. I could make an entire essay just about Mithrin and all that he stands for, and I probably will when season 2 comes out and he will eventually become a new Tumblr sexy man and you won't be able to escape Mithrin Kinnies on Twitter. The reason why I love Mithrin so much and why I think he's such a powerful character is because he stands in opposition to a very deeply rooted idea in Western culture that ridding yourself of desire makes you pure. I am so thankful to Ryoko Kui for the way she handles Mithrin. It's so refreshing to see him be presented to the audience as a wreck of a man, rather than a person that, once he's freed of earthly desires, becomes an enlightened, noble soul. Through Mithrin we learn that without desire, life cannot continue. If you don't want anything, what do you have left? It's such a clever analogy for depression and trauma. I could go on, but one last thing that really stood out to me was when Mithrin, in the end, finally realized that his desire wasn't the desire for revenge, but a desire to be consumed. It's a really poignant moment, but I wonder if that kind of desire is selfless or selfish. Maybe both. Thistle is also such an interesting and tragic character to me. The divide between races development-wise is the most clear with Delgol and Thistle. That scene where Delgol begs Thistle to save the Golden Kingdom is so incredibly sad to me, since he is essentially begging his older brother to help him, but his older brother is development-wise still a teenager. Thistle is canonically stuck at like 13 or 14 years old. He's a kid. I think this truly speaks to how the demons choose relatively easy targets. Thistle was a kid put in position of responsibility he should never have been in. Mithrin was a young man obsessed with proving his own worth due to his repressed inferiority complex, and Marcel is controlled by fear. Now, let's finally talk about her. The beginning of the series is the end of Fallon's life. The instant the red dragon's jaws close around her waist, our main characters are thrust into a life-altering adventure. And Fallon? Well, she becomes Dungeon Meshi's dead wife, by which I mean that she haunts the narrative in the same way many other female characters in media tend to do. Until we see Fallon again, we get to experience Fallon exclusively through the eyes of other people. We see Fallon as a noble cleric, the sweetest, purest girl that you could ever imagine. Not only has she done nothing wrong, she was also ostracized and bullied for things out of her control. Fallon never asked for anything. She was so quiet and didn't take much space. Her death was a noble sacrifice. She's a saint. And then, when we first meet Fallon, she's a pile of bones, covered in blood. And when the actual main plot of Dungeon Meshi begins, she's a monster. Before meeting Falagon, the main point the show tries to drive into your head is that monsters are inherently dangerous, selfish beings. We see it with Senshi and the Kelpie, and with Laios and Kensuke. So when the party finally comes face to face with the Chimera, both of those lessons need to come to play. And it takes Cabru to bring Marcel and Laios back to reality.
Give it a rest already. Don't you care how many people you're sacrificing just to protect this one individual? That's not even her anymore! It's just a monster!
But I wonder, is Kaboru completely right? I watched this scene many times and read the manga, and I'm still not so sure. It's interesting to me how she doesn't hurt her old party members once. Kaboru's right next to Laios, but she doesn't swing at him. I wonder how it felt for Fallon to be the Red Dragon. She clearly didn't have much conscious control over what she did because of Thistle's influence over the Red Dragon's soul, but do you think that maybe, just maybe, a part of Fallon reveled in wiping out an entire party? Do you think that when she ripped her shirt open with a scream, she maybe finally felt free? That for the first time in her life, she embraced the monster she was always told she was. And now, with all the rage she kept locked in her heart, she charged. The dungeon will give you what you want it to. Is this what Fallon wanted? Was this a part of her desire? Fallon spent most of her life being ostracized and misunderstood. The first friend she's ever made treats her like a child. The guy that claims to love her is in love with a picture-perfect image of her that doesn't actually exist, and her brother is very focused on other things. Fallon is lonely. When Ryokokui essentially defiles the image of perfection by making her a bloodthirsty, impossibly hungry monster, she's making quite a statement. If even perfect Fallon cannot escape being devoured, what chance do you have? In the age of grind culture, Dungeon Meshi is making a controversial statement. At a time when denying yourself food is better than being fat, overworking is better than being lazy, and being alone is better than being annoying, this sweet fantasy anime is a countercultural masterpiece. We repeatedly hear that to want is to be weak. True superiority can only be achieved by ridding oneself of selfish desires that don't contribute to one's arbitrary success. The romanticization of abstinence is nothing new. It's a philosophy that many cultures are built on. Essentially, what our culture has done is it added morality to the equation. There are good desires, ones that are selfless or ones that get you closer to some kind of achievement, and bad desires. And I'm not talking about like wanting to hurt someone. I'm talking about unnecessarily demonizing basic human needs. Expressing emotion is attention seeking. Nothing tastes as good as skinny feels. You're not working for free overtime, you're lazy. Dungeon Meshi turns those messages on their heads. It's okay to want. It's okay to be hungry. You need to eat, says Senshi. It's okay to be passionate, says Laios. By denying yourself your basic needs, you're harming yourself, says Shuro. Take it slow and let go of judgment like Marcel does. Marcel learns to let go of her judgment throughout the story, but she starts out as someone who sees other people's needs as inherently wrong because they are selfish. She's angry at Namari for leaving. She's disappointed in Toshiro. She's shocked when Chochak reveals that he's with them for the money. And the lesson she learns from those situations is that living is inherently selfish. And to live, you need to consider your own needs and fight for them. To eat is the privilege of the living. Dungeon Meshi repeatedly makes that point. Our desires are what makes us alive. It's what keeps us going. Even if some of the things we wish for are selfish, even if sometimes our desires swallow us whole and make us into monsters. To want is to live. And do you know what you want? What I know I want is to hit 20,000 subscribers. So if you enjoyed this video, subscribe and you can watch this other video I worked really hard on. So subscribe and bye bye! Oh, dungeon food. Delicious in dungeon.